HighBridge, a division of Recorded Books, presents A Spy Named Orphan, The Enigma of Donald Maclean, by Roland Philipps. Read by Jonathan Cowley. Prologue. Donald Maclean awoke on the 25th of May 1951 at his house in the quiet Kent village of Tatsfield to a beautiful late spring day, a welcome change in the weather. That Friday morning would be his last in England. It was his 38th birthday. He ate his breakfast of bacon and eggs with 2 cups of tea in his usual haste. The housekeeper and nanny to his sons Fergus and young Donald, known as Beanie, entered the comfortable Victorian villa to see him rush upstairs to kiss his American wife Melinda goodbye. Remarkably, given the traumatic year they had just had, Melinda was now 8 months pregnant with their 3rd child. Donald came back downstairs, quickly watered the cyclamen that Melinda had bought him, bent his long frame into his car, and set off for Oxted Station and the commuter train to London's Victoria. When he arrived in London, the tall, slender, elegantly pinstriped diplomat with his trademark bow tie, his good looks now with an air of distinction about them as his blonde hair was starting to grey, walked briskly from the station through St. James's Park, which was in full flower, to the Foreign Office. The man with the trilby and unnecessary raincoat had to adopt an undignified scurry to keep pace with Maclean's stride. It was almost as if the taller man were taunting him. Maclean was at his desk as head of the American department by 10 o'clock as usual. He was young for such a prestigious job, the latest promotion in what had so far been, with one setback, a remarkably successful career. He was on track to reach the heights of his profession, the major ambassadorship certainly, perhaps even ending up as permanent secretary. His friends were already calling him Sir Donald Maclean, OHMS, in recognition of his work on His Majesty's service. Here was a cultivated, laconic Mandarin who was also a highly experienced Soviet agent, and MI5, Britain's domestic intelligence service, were on to him. Maclean's employers had been exceptionally loyal. They had not only brought him back into the fold the previous winter, but they had promoted him to his influential new post. Less than a year before, he had been in the throes of paranoid alcoholism and had come close to bringing disgrace upon British diplomacy. When one of his oldest friends had picked him up at the station on his way to stay with her in Wiltshire, she had been so alarmed by his appearance that she took him first to a friend's garden to relax before driving him home. As he lay on piled-up cushions beneath a beech tree, he was seized by an attack of delirium tremens so violent that he kept jumping up to fight the branches above him. An acquaintance saw him soon afterwards and described him as looking as if he had spent the night sitting up in a tunnel. A year on, and a delicious lunch in Soho seemed a fitting celebration both of his birthday and of his recovery. The Foreign Office had been constructed on a regal scale in keeping with the majesty of the British Empire in the mid-1860s. That empire was now shrinking fast, although the outlook of the politicians and diplomats was not always keeping pace with the decline. The great ideological struggle of the 20th century between communism and capitalism was now being fought as a Cold War between the superpowers of America and the Soviet Union. Britain's most potent contribution to the struggle had ended with the Second World War, when Donald Maclean had held a prime ringside seat in Washington, D.C. The grandest office in the Whitehall building was that of the Foreign Secretary, and there Herbert Morrison had the previous day signed the order for Maclean to be brought in for questioning. Although the extent of his betrayal was barely understood, the trap was about to snap shut on one of the most influential spies of the century. Maclean's lunch date, who had helped him through his crisis the previous year, drove her jeep into the palatial Foreign Office courtyard just before noon. She noticed he was wearing a jaunty bow tie, always a sign that he was in good spirits. Gone was the shaky wreck of the previous summer. They chatted about his family over pre-prandial oysters and a half bottle of champagne in Wheeler's fish restaurant, then made their way through Soho's bustle and sunny spirits to Schmidt's, where they were meeting the friend's husband for an unseasonably heavy German lunch. En route, they bumped into a writer they knew, who noted that Maclean seemed calm and genial, a welcome change from the gate-crasher who had appeared late in the evening at his Regent's Park home a couple of weeks earlier and passed out in the hallway, so that the departing dinner guests had to step over him. As Maclean had insisted on paying for their lunch, he needed to refill his wallet, so he walked back to Whitehall, his watcher trotting not far behind via the Travellers' Club in Pall Mall to cash a cheque for £10. He was back at his desk by 3 o'clock for the only planned meeting of the day, a dull one which he dispatched with his usual efficiency. He left his office for the last time around 5:45, reminded a colleague that he would not be at work the following morning, Saturday, and ran into his boss, Sir Roger Makins, in the grand courtyard with its marble pavements and arched colonnades. Makins thought highly of Maclean, and had given him his current job after being impressed by him when they worked together on top-secret atomic matters in Washington at the end of the war. Makins had been as astonished as all the other senior men in the Foreign Office when he had learned of Maclean's crimes, but had been assured that there was no danger that he would be able to leave the country, so he acted in his normal, friendly manner. The tale followed Maclean to Victoria, where he caught the 6:10 train, carrying a cardboard box and a few small parcels, but without his briefcase. Makins was the last civil servant to see him. Donald Maclean was now invisible to official eyes. That same afternoon, Guy Burgess, an acquaintance of Maclean's from their days in Cambridge, and someone he had seen on several occasions in the past couple of weeks, was in his flat in New Bond Street preparing for a journey. He carefully packed a tweed suit, some shirts, shoes, socks, a dinner jacket, shaving kit, £300 and the novels of Jane Austen in a one-volume collected edition. I never travel without it, and put the case into the back of a cream Austin A40 he had hired that afternoon. Tickets had been booked for the midnight sailing of a ship, the Falaise, on the advice of Anthony Blunt, surveyor of the King's Pictures and director of the Courtauld Institute, an establishment figure soon to be recognized with a knighthood. Blunt, Burgess, and Maclean were all three members of the Cambridge spy ring, known to their Soviet controllers as the Magnificent Five. Now, after decades of brilliant espionage that meant no government had ever been as comprehensively penetrated as Britain's, the ring was about to come apart. Melinda Maclean later claimed that she had spent the day baking her husband a birthday cake and preparing a special dinner, and that she was therefore understandably upset when he got back to announce that not only would Roger Stiles, a friend of his she had never heard of, be joining them, but the pair had to go somewhere on business immediately after dinner, and might even have to spend the night away. He started to go upstairs to pack, and they argued. Not only was it too bad that he had invited an unknown guest home for his birthday, which they could have spent as a family, but now he was not even staying with her and their boys, both of whom were in bed with measles. She would now be alone as she prepared the house for his high-maintenance sister, Nancy, and Nancy's new husband, who were arriving on the following day. She begged him not to go, but he insisted. The argument woke up their son Fergus, aged 7, who asked, "Why are you going away, Daddy? Can I stand at the window and watch you go?" His father said, "Get back into bed, you little scamp. I'm not going far. I'll be back soon." Roger Stiles, dark and thickish set, turned up half an hour after his host, and was introduced to Melinda, who found him charming and easy to talk to. Dinner was in the end a chatty, normal meal, with nobody showing any sign of strain. After dinner, Maclean announced that they had to be on their way smartly and went out to stoke the boiler for the night, leaving Styles talking to his wife. They did indeed have to hurry, and only just covered the 90 miles to Southampton in time to embark at 11:45. They left the car on the dockside as they jumped aboard. "We'll be back for it on Monday," they shouted to a waiting sailor. The following morning, they stayed on the boat for too long, drinking beer, before disembarking in Saint-Malo, leaving their luggage and some disorder in their shared cabin. Although a few days earlier a general instruction had been put out for UK police and passport control to watch for Maclean, the British had chosen not to share this warning with continental police or ports for fear of leaks, so the pair were free to have a leisurely cooked breakfast. They were so leisurely that they missed the 11:20 boat train to Paris and ended up hiring a taxi to drive them the 43 miles to Rennes, where they caught up with the train. The Foreign Office was shut from Saturday afternoon until Monday morning, in common with the rest of the country, so, as she later explained, Melinda could not do anything to contact her husband until Monday at 10 o'clock, when she rang his office to say that she had lost track of him. Makins thought he might have given Maclean that day off as well, so it was not until she called again and mentioned his hurried departure with Roger Styles that anyone became worried, and then, in a very controlled and Mandarin way, panic-stricken. Word went out to all the diplomatic and consular posts on the continent to look out for the two men and to report back on a clear-the-line basis direct to the Prime Minister. The charming, well-connected, and brilliant enigma that was Donald Maclean had made his choice. The events of that day provoked a sea change within the British establishment, destroyed much of the carefully built trust between Britain and America, and damaged the great nation's standing in the eyes of the world. The Cold War was about to get very much colder. This is the story of a scandal still reverberating today, although the man at its center has, until now, largely remained a mystery. 1. Purity in thought. By any standards, Donald Maclean was a very successful schoolboy. He had risen to the highest rank in his school's officer training corps, was a prefect, the editor of the school magazine, secretary of its League of Nations Union, and a successful all-round sportsman with colours in cricket, rugby, and hockey. His contemporaries regarded him as way ahead of others, at a time when the others included those who were to become some of the leading figures in British political, public, and intellectual life. He left his centuries-old school as the holder of an exhibition to Cambridge, at the summit of the first generation of Macleans to go to university, the hopes of his ambitious parents and teachers intact, a glittering future lying before him. The reference later provided by his school for the Foreign Office seems to bask in shared triumph as it enumerates his achievements and acclaims his moral character as exceptionally good. He was the ultimate insider at the school, liberal and not too showy, high-achieving without being seen to try too hard. Yet although a combination of his devout family upbringing and his school's unique disciplinary code enabled him to appear as a reliable person of integrity who would not let you down, this young paragon was already morally primed to be the cat that walked alone, the outsider with an open invitation to betray one's friends, and to betray his country even as he was its most diligent servant. He needed to find a cause and an opportunity. Donald Maclean was born in 1913, when the British Empire was at its zenith, before the Great War and the Russian Revolution undermined the assumptions that upheld it. His father, also Donald, was a successful Member of Parliament and a leading member of that exalted establishment that sustained the empire. He was of strong nonconformist stock, a stern and austere patriot who was able to love and serve his country while applying his highly developed conscience to every decision he took in its service. Of his 5 children, his namesake was the one who turned out simultaneously most to resemble him, and yet most to go against the grain. The roots of their beliefs were planted firmly in the soil of the barren, windswept Hebridean island of Tiree. Sir Fitzroy Maclean, 26th Chief of the Clan Maclean, summoned his clansmen from all over the world to Duart Castle on the far northern Isle of Mull, Tyree's neighbour, for the 24th of August 1912. All were loyal members of one of the oldest and fiercest families of Argyll and the Hebrides, families that had for the most part been scattered in the highland clearances of the previous century, as the landowners ejected the crofters to make way for their vast flocks of sheep. The devout and hard-working Liberal Member of Parliament, now being celebrated as a prominent member of the clan, was just a generation away from his father's subsistence on the soil, on part-time work as a fisherman, and on meagre earnings as a shoemaker in their tiny home. His obedience to the summons was a demonstration of the pride he felt in his small branch of the vast clan tree, in their rise from their centuries-old, back-breaking and diligent Hebridean life to middle-class Edwardian comfort and national respectability. He kept the invitation to the gathering at Duart Castle among his papers for the rest of his life. His 3rd son and middle child, born 9 months later on the 25th of May, was named Donald Duart, binding the infant to his own success and the newly attained family standing. From then on, Duart became the middle name of all his male descendants. Donald instilled in his children, young Donald especially, a powerful moral impulse. When he died, Stanley Baldwin paid tribute to him in the House of Commons. "In Donald Maclean I see a soul as clean as the west wind that blows over Tiree, where he was born." In fact, Donald Sr. had been born in Lancashire in 1868, as his father John had come south with his wife, Agnes Macmillan, to look for work. No more successful in the north of England, John continued moving down the country until he reached Haverfordwest, in the southwest corner of Wales, and later nearby Carmarthen, where his cordwaining skills could flourish. But the former Prime Minister correctly identified the defining characteristic of Sir Donald, the purity of his soul, the clarity of conscience which throughout his life drove him to act as that conscience dictated, not for personal gain, but for the greater good as he and his religion saw it. Both Donald and his younger brother Ewan received a grammar school education in South Wales. Donald moved to Cardiff at the age of 19 to train as a solicitor, soon forming his own firm with a partner. The Welsh nonconformist Methodist tradition, known locally as chapel, and resistant to the established Anglican Church, suited a man with his upbringing and reinforced his certainty that the writ of God could not be transgressed for fear of damnation, his conviction that others must be helped onto the right paths. Nonconformity ran deep within the family in both action and reaction. The religion emphasized temperance. Sir Donald was a lifelong teetotaler who banned alcohol and tobacco in his houses, although his friend, neighbour and fellow Scot J.M. Barrie, author of Peter Pan, noted that at times he lit a cigarette to please me, and I have almost as nobly looked the other way while he got rid of it. On a special occasion, I have also seen a ginger beer bottle in his hand. Among his other early appointments, Maclean was a director of a life assurance company, the United Kingdom Temperance and General Provident Institution, a founder of the National Society for the Prevention of Cruelty to Children, secretary of the Cardiff Chamber of Commerce and vice president of the Cardiff Free Church Council, advocating tolerance for all beliefs in conscience as well as in the debate over free trade. C.P. Scott of the Manchester Guardian wrote in his diary that Maclean had liberalism in his bones, and all this activity in the Welsh Liberal heartland brought him to the attention of the leader of the party, Herbert Asquith. Maclean entered Parliament at his second attempt as MP for Bath in 1906, glad to support the new Prime Minister, a man he loved as few men are loved by another. Donald Maclean worked hard and quickly made his mark in Parliament by modesty, sincerity, and industry, concentrating on domestic issues that would improve the lot of the working or unemployed man, labour exchanges, old age pensions, and national insurance. In 1907 he opened an office in London, and in that year married Gwendolen Devitt, the daughter of a Surrey magistrate and colonial rubber broker. In her only daughter's eyes, Gwendolen was an exceptionally good-looking woman, but very difficult to live with, as she reinforced, in a less biblically stern way, the pattern of parental dominance over her children. Although her parenting style was sweeping, unethical, and, to modern thinking, wrong, the family doctor described her as that type of strong personality you often do get as the parent of episodic drinkers. A judgment made at a time when young Donald was finding it impossible to stick to his father's temperate path. Gwendolen was a forthright product of her age and her own upbringing. Like almost all girls of her generation, she was not well educated, yet she was never afraid to speak her mind, the more so as she got older. She was imperious to the point where her family gave her the affectionate nickname the Queen Bee, abbreviated in speech and correspondence to Queenie. The Macleans made a handsome couple. He had a florid complexion, and since his late 20s his hair had been white. She was a fine-looking woman with a lively manner. When Asquith invited them to dinner to meet the Prince of Wales, Asquith described her as young and quite good-looking, with glowing cheeks and glittering eyes. Donald remained strongly attached to his mother all his life, but she was no more privy to the most important parts of his mind than anyone else. She in turn remained devoted to her son and to the memory of her husband and his principles. When young Donald was being splashed across the front pages of every newspaper, it was Lloyd George who was that traitor for splitting the Liberal Party half a century earlier. In her eyes, constancy was the key to both Donalds. Ian Maclean was born in 1908, followed by Andrew in 1910, then Donald Duart, known by his parents as Tinto for Teeny Don, in 1913, Nancy in 1918, and, when Sir Donald, as he had become for his work in the House of Commons during the First World War, was 60, and Lady Maclean 44, their fourth son, Alan Duart, in 1924. The expanding family and their cook, parlourmaid, housemaid, nanny and nursery maid moved into a stuccoed 5-story house at 6 Southwick Place, Bayswater. The house, with its porticoed entrance and gloomy interiors, was just on the north side of Hyde Park, close to Paddington Station for Sir Donald's visits to his business in Cardiff and to his constituency, which by then was North Cornwall. The Macleans also bought Elm Cottage in the village of Penn in Buckinghamshire's Chiltern Hills. The largely 18th-century house had 3/4 of an acre of land, an orchard, a vegetable garden, and rose beds, which the children weeded and pruned during their weekends there. Penn, about 25 miles from London, was true to the Quaker foundation that had sent William Penn from there to found the state of Pennsylvania in the 17th century. Whether or not this influenced the Macleans in their choice of country retreat, Sir Donald did not relax his religious principles there. Ian got into very hot water with his father when he saw God First painted on the wall and told villagers that it was announcing the result of a bicycle race. Their summer holidays were spent in Cornwall and carried on the same routine of daily prayers and healthy endeavour. The senior Macleans, Sir Donald's mother, speaking Gaelic as her first language, also lived with them until her death in 1924, led blameless lives. He worked soundly and sweet-temperedly in Parliament, promoting free trade and improving the lot of his less fortunate countrymen. In the occasional periods when he did not have a seat, Sir Donald was a diligent solicitor, charity campaigner and committee man, as well as a lay preacher. Religion was always at the centre of family life, claustrophobically so for his children. Sir Donald, in his frock coat and grey silk hat, led his family every Sunday to the Presbyterian Church in Marylebone to hear about grace through faith and the absolute sovereignty of God. J. M. Barrie wrote in the Times after Sir Donald's death that, "You did not know him at all unless you knew his religion." He was in London as much a Scotch Presbyterian as though he had never left his native Tiree. He was an elder of the church, and in his home held that family exercise in which a Scottish household is seen at its best. These family prayers were one of young Donald's strongest memories. Enforced daily service to a God one could not believe in would be a good working discipline for when he had formed his own views. Donald saw his father as a middle-aged martinet and a harsh man. He was fixed in his ways, Victorian in style, and unbending in his outlook, insisting on the highest and purest standards of probity. He was clear that his son's privileged start in life meant the offices where they could do most good were easily attainable by them if they worked hard and looked to their morals. There were rows when Ian and Andrew crashed back into the teetotal fold in the small hours after late-night parties. Drinking was a source of deep shame in Sir Donald's eyes. His middle son took this in at an impressionable age, and made increasingly vain attempts to keep his consumption under control, until it became mired in his own profound shame and ultimately overwhelmed him. When Sir Donald had reached the peak of his career towards the end of his life, he became a doting old parent to his two youngest children. Tinto was in the middle of these two groups, able to forge his own beliefs unseen behind the paired older boys and their battles, neither the girl nor the baby of the family. The clever one they did not have to worry about, but also the one who had to feel his way, watchful without drawing attention to himself, finding his own outlets for his inherited conscience. Paradoxically, young Donald, who found his father and his principles daunting, absorbed so thoroughly his passionate belief that you did what you thought was right at all costs, that he too became a genuine political animal. The two Donalds felt the same vehement sense of rectitude, and saw the world in terms of clearly defined certainties which they both acted upon consistently. When Alan and young Donald were sharing a bedroom and recovering from flu, they spent hours playing soldiers together on the floor of their room, the 5-year-old Alan trying to ensure that the glorious Highlanders always beat the ragged sepoys ranged against them, the teenage Donald playing for the opposite result. When the younger boy complained that this did not seem to be the way things were in real life, his elder brother said, "Why shouldn't the Indians win? After all, it's their country." Even as a pillar of the diplomatic corps, Donald could be provoked to unstatesmanlike rage by a chance derogatory remark that violated his personal moral codes and the rights of those without a voice. He carried his father's moral imprint deep within him for the rest of his life. After a few years at St. Mary's College in Lancaster Gate, near the family's London home, Maclean went at the age of 10 to Gresham's School, Holt, isolated just outside a picturesque Georgian town on the far eastern edge of England. The great and misnamed public schools that nurtured the British elite, Eton, Harrow, Winchester, Marlborough, and the rest, tended to be within easy reach of London. Alongside this geographical difference, the school had developed a unique ethos that set it even further apart from its rivals, and made it the perfect psychological training ground for a nascent spy. W. H. Auden wrote shortly after leaving Gresham's that he thought its disciplinary code had been the most potent engine for turning his schoolmates into remote introverts, for perpetuating those very faults of character which it was intended to cure. It meant...
Sample complete. Ready to continue?